welcome you into Studio B on this Monday. Hi, everybody. Welcome. It's great to have you with us this time. There's a huge shift taking place in the hard-fought battle for the Republican presidential nomination. The goal now, delegates, the magic number on everyone's lips, 1,237. Because of his lead and the relatively small number of contests still to take place, only Donald Trump can achieve a first ballot victory. But if the polls hold and he loses to Ted Cruz tomorrow in Wisconsin, we could be looking at an historic fight. Politico reporter Ben Schreck is here now with more on all of this. Good to have you here. Let's talk about Wisconsin. The focus has been on Wisconsin for a while. If the contest were to be held this moment, we think Ted Cruz would emerge victorious.
That's right, and right now it's not just about the vote count, it's really a battle for delegates. Every congressional district that you win in Wisconsin, you get 3 delegates. Right now it's looking like Trump may win one of those districts, he may win 2, he may win none, walk out of there with either 3 or 6 delegates or get shut out. And that's going to be a major boon, especially to Ted Cruz. Wisconsin's
an interesting state, and we'll bore in more on this delegate situation, which is so big right now in a moment. But Wisconsin's an interesting state. The battle between Clinton and Sanders seems to favor him because the folks participating in the Democratic primary in Wisconsin are left of center. And the same can be said for the Cruz-Trump battle. Republicans in Wisconsin tend to be right of center. So this is one where the more moderate candidate may not find things going their way, and someone like a Sanders or Cruz could have a good night.
That's right. And on the Republican side, unlike in many states, there's a pretty good relationship between the conservative movement and the leadership of the state. Scott Walker's a favorite of conservative leaders. In many other states, you see sort of talk radio trashing the elected governor. But right now, you sort of have the Wisconsin establishment and the conservative movement in a united front supporting Ted Cruz against Trump, and sort of almost seeing it as their responsibility to stop someone that they don't believe is a true conservative.
Let's talk about delegates. The focus in the early states is racking up victories, reaching as many voters as possible, putting wins on the board. But now the thinking is to the gathering in Cleveland this July, and who will be in the building as a credentialed delegate able to vote for a candidate for the Republican presidential nomination. And this becomes particularly critical if Donald Trump can't wrap things up on the first ballot. And a loss in Wisconsin makes that path even more fraught.
That's right, and I think the consensus is that it's first ballot or bust for Donald Trump. We're not even going to have a sense of whether he's likely to get to 1237 until June 7th, the very last day of voting, when we'll see California award well over 100 delegates. So this primary race is going to come down to the wire, and it's likely that even after June 7th, it's not going to be entirely clear, because this is such a complex, sprawling process where every state has its own rules, just how many delegates each of these people have. And then even before voting starts at this convention, you're going to have all sorts of bureaucratic fights about whether some delegates get challenged, whether there's a vote to say we're not going to seat, say, the Louisiana delegation because there's been some irregularity. There's going to be fights about what the rules say about who's eligible for the nomination at all. So it's going to be complex, and it's going to be exciting.
So what are the Trump camp, the Cruz camp, and the party in general preparing for now? What are they thinking about? What sort of plans are they making? What sort of people are they bringing on board in anticipation for what could be for something that is quite unprecedented in what we can call the modern era?
Sure. So the Cruz campaign has been planning for this all along. They're probably, of all the 17 Republican campaigns that we saw, the Cruz campaign probably put the most planning into the process. The Kasich campaign isn't really talking about what their strategy is. The Trump campaign is coming late to the game. They suffered some embarrassing setbacks in Louisiana, for example, where Trump should have had most of the delegates coming out of that state, but the Cruz campaign came in. They understood the delegate selection process better. They peeled away some Trump delegates. And in response to problems like that, the Trump campaign brought on last week a guy named Paul Manafort, who was with Gerald Ford at the 1976 convention. He was with Reagan in '80, a veteran, and he's trying to sort of get the act together at the last minute. And it's not clear whether or not he'll be able to do it.
What makes this so complicated? Folks watching might say, you know, a delegate's a delegate. Where does the intrigue arise?
Oh, there's no end to the intrigue and to the sort of the room for bureaucratic parliamentary maneuvering. Every state has its own rules for how these people are selected. In some states, the executive committee just votes up or down on a slate of delegates. In some states, delegates are directly elected. Some states, like North Dakota and Colorado, pick delegates, and those delegates can do whatever they want. Other states, they're legally bound to vote for whoever won the vote in that state.
No matter how many ballots there are.
And that's where it gets even more complicated.
That's where it gets complicated, right? Is how many delegates are bound only on the first ballot and free to basically put their own stamp on their vote, to vote their own preference after the first ballot, if we get that far. I mean, you almost have to be of a certain age to remember a convention where this was a factor, where this was even an issue or relevant. And yet we think we're headed in that direction now. So you're bound on the first ballot, you're free after that, for some.
Yeah, for hundreds. And some are bound through the second, some are bound through the third,
ballot.
Some are bound the whole way through. Many people are already starting to speculate that after the first, second, and third ballots, when anyone who's going to be unbound becomes unbound, that Paul Ryan, his name will be thrown into consideration.
Why?
Because he is the most conservative member of the establishment. He fills a role that Scott Walker at the beginning of this campaign filled, as someone who's acceptable to both the grassroots of the party and to the party establishment. He's already set himself up as an anti-Trump. He gave a speech last week, maybe 2 weeks ago now, about civility, that without mentioning Trump's name was a condemnation of the type of campaign that Trump's been running.
So he's stable enough that he doesn't scare moderates, and he's conservative enough that he could be palatable to some of the people whose main choice is under this scenario, not going to win, not going to prevail.
That's right. And, you know, Cruz and Kasich have their own plans for what happens after a first ballot. If it continues to head in this direction, it's going to be one of the most sort of wide open power grabs in American politics in a long time.
Donald Trump has talked openly and frequently about what he thinks will be the ramifications of any process that denies the nomination to the guy with the most delegates, even if that total that Trump arrives in Cleveland with is shy of what everyone acknowledges is the magic number, 1,237. There's a general belief in the mind of Donald Trump and perhaps many of his supporters that if a second place finisher or third or fourth or a guy who hasn't spent a moment on the campaign trail is the GOP nominee, it's Katie bar the door, folks will be unhappy.
Yeah, not only has Trump said that folks will be unhappy, he says that he expects riots if he goes into the convention as the leader and votes in delegates and doesn't emerge as the nominee. Hopefully there is no violence. Cleveland, the city, the police are preparing for that possibility. They've ordered riot gear, the police department. And then beyond the immediate possibilities during the convention, there's a possibility that Trump's voters stay home, that delivers a crippling blow in November, or that it fractures the party in a more long-term way, and that, you know, whatever emerges as the next iteration of the Republican Party looks different from what we have today.
We know that Donald Trump met with RNC Chair Reince Priebus just in the last few days. We don't know a lot, not surprisingly, about what they talked about. I would think this would be a moment, a semi-unique moment, certainly in our modern politics, where Reince Priebus wakes up every day and looks in the mirror and it's like, oh, this hasn't all been a bad dream. This is real. And one more day to slog through what has to be a challenge. I mean, people openly talking about the party breaking apart. Donald Trump talked about being the most unpopular nominee ever nominated by an American political party. I mean, he's got to be pulling his hair out at some point. That's in some regard.
Yeah, I think Reince Priebus is almost a tragic figure of this cycle, in that we've never seen, or at least in a long time, we haven't seen the Republican National Committee with this little hold on the process. And it's not just what's going on with this Trump insurgency, but there are sort of deeper causes here in terms of the amount of money that Citizens United has led into the process, the fact that mega donors like the Koch brothers have set up structures that are almost parallel to the Republican Party. And so the RNC itself is sort of a nadir of its influence. And you see that with Reince Priebus getting up on stage at these debates and saying, we're going to unify behind the nominee, and everyone else sort of saying, we don't really expect that to happen.
Amazing. And as we mentioned before, Wisconsin does vote tomorrow, so the political calendar moves forward. Ben Schreckinger of Politico, always great having you here. Thanks very much for stopping by.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Talk with you again soon when we return a plan that could transform the sports landscape here in the Washington area.